For months, the cry was, wait for the Pentagon report. Today comes the Pentagon report, and guess what? The answer from 7 out of 10 members of the military about don't ask, don't tell is don't care. So tonight, our fourth story, now the Pentagon's message to Senate Republicans is this: repeal don't ask, don't tell by year's end yourselves, or let those boogeymen of your imagination, the activist judges, do it for you. 70% of service members believe that a repeal will not affect the military's ability to get the job done, and 69% of those surveyed believe they've already served with somebody who is gay, and 30% predict negative effects of a repeal. The report, though, concludes that any fallout could be mitigated through effective leadership. Defense Secretary Gates and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mullen, holding a joint news conference earlier to discuss the findings.
My perspective is, what I would call certainly was my personal opinion, is now my professional view, that this is a policy change that we can make, and we can do it in a relatively low-risk fashion.
Both men also stressing the importance of having the repeal passed by Congress. Their argument about that: legislative action would guarantee stability and allow the military time to implement the repeal in some sort of orderly way. If it's left up to the courts, chaos.
It is only a matter of time before the federal courts are drawn once more into the fray, with the very real possibility that this change would be imposed immediately by judicial fiat. By far the most disruptive and damaging scenario I can imagine, and one of the most hazardous to military morale, readiness, and battlefield performance. Given the present circumstances, those that choose not to act legislatively are rolling the dice that this policy will not be abruptly overturned by the courts.
And despite the Pentagon's call for repeal by year's end, the man who shouted, "You lie," at the commander-in-chief during a joint session of Congress, Joe Wilson, believes that voting on repeal during the lame duck session would be, quote, highly irresponsible. But the House has already passed repeal. In a statement this afternoon, Mr. Obama is targeting the Senate, urging it to act as soon as possible so I can sign this repeal into law this year. Meanwhile, one of the policy's biggest proponents is currently in the process of carefully reviewing the Pentagon's report. Senator McCain, who was originally for the repeal in 2006, if military leaders were for it. But once the military leaders were for it, McCain wanted to wait for the study. Then, before the findings of this study were even out, he asked for a do-over.
Once we get this study, we need to have hearings, and we need to examine it, and we need to look at whether it's the kind of study that we wanted. It isn't, in my view, because I wanted a study to determine the effects of the repeal on battle effectiveness and morale.
His most recent position: the policy is working. P.S. Get off my lawn.
It's called don't ask, don't tell, okay? If you don't ask somebody, we don't ask somebody, and they don't tell, and it's an all-volunteer force, okay? Now, I understand your point of view, and I understand the point of view by the majority of the media, but the fact is this was a political promise made by an inexperienced president or candidate for presidency of the United States. The military is at its highest point in recruitment and retention and professionalism and capability. So to somehow allege that this policy has been damaging the military is simply false. So the fact is that this system is working.
As long as you're a homophobe. Time now to call in the editorial director for The Stranger, syndicated columnist, co-founder of the It Gets Better project, Dan Savage. Dan, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
This study is more than just, as Senator McCain implied, some sort of anecdotal evidence done by amateurs and outsiders. It's data directly from the people who are in the military. Why is that not enough for this Senator McCain?
Because, not to put too fine a point on it, McCain is a bigot. There's really no other explanation for his backflips and his hypocrisy than just irrational animus, which is the definition of bigotry. You know, the most important stat to come out of this study is that of the 70% of soldiers and Marines and airmen who served alongside people that they knew to be gay or lesbian, 92% of those people who've already served with a gay or lesbian person in the armed forces are supportive of repeal and say they have no problem working alongside and serving alongside openly gay and lesbian soldiers. And for McCain now to want to wring his hands and say, oh, we need more studies, more time, who's left to interview? The Spartans? Who's left to interview about this process? It's time to repeal this thing.
The idea behind Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen saying frame this as control versus chaos, legislative versus judicial, is that going to perhaps give cover to those Republicans who've been opposing repeal and let them get out of this with some sort of climb down?
Perhaps a few Republicans will grab that fig leaf that that Secretary Gates held out, and let's hope they do. But we've already seen what happens when a federal judge ordered the immediate suspension of DADT, and there was, I think, a week there where there were no suspensions and no enforcement of DADT, and chaos did not break out. What's chaotic is really the implementation of DADT. And what's dangerous is DADT. We have a policy right now that requires people to lie about their sexual orientation and makes them potential blackmail targets. And gay and lesbian people are serving in silence and serving in secrecy at all levels of the military. And each and every one of them is potentially blackmailable under DADT right now, which is another reason, for national security reasons, we need to repeal this thing immediately.
I heard something extraordinary said on this network today by a guest who was opposed to gays, I guess, serving in the military outright. And she said there will be zero tolerance for people who are objecting to the repeal, and that would mean that perhaps thousands of loyal, patriotic, courageous American service members would be expelled for no good reason from military service. Does that construction sound at all familiar to you?
Yes, it does. And the same thing was said, you know, when it came to integrating the military racially. And the exact same thing was said more recently in the United Kingdom when they were deciding whether or not to allow gays and lesbians to serve openly in the military. And people predicted chaos. People also predicted mass resignations and more difficulties in retaining soldiers. And none of that came to pass. And the UK military's leadership has described implementing the end of their own Don't Ask, Don't Tell as the biggest non-issue ever that the military confronted. That's just demagoguery and fear-mongering, and really an insult to the professionalism of the soldiers who are currently serving. What that person is saying is that they can't follow orders and that they'll let their personal biases and hatreds get them in trouble, get them carried away. You know, you don't have to like everybody that you serve with in the military, approve of them or approve of their faith or their sexual orientation or anything else, but you do have to follow orders and serve alongside them and get along to get along. And our military can do that, and our soldiers can do that.
Syndicated columnist Dan Savage. Dan, great thanks tonight.
Thanks so much, Keith.